Fraction. Anybody know who Robert and Fraction was?
We used to do a spelling book, I think, with him.
Oh, is that right?
Did he teach at Western?
He taught at Western.
I don't remember what the name of the spelling book was, but Kathy found it in his school left or whatever it was called.
Okay, and his wife was a teacher in Blaine. I think it was the Blaine School District. So it's a local connection.
What were their names again, Robert?
Robert and Marlene McCracken. The rationale for doing this strategy is it is done in a low anxiety environment, so low affective filter. It teaches the parts of speech. For elementary teachers, we're going to be working on grammar this year. This is a great way to teach grammar. And it models sentence formation. How many of your students cannot put a coherent sentence together? This is a great way to model it. The sentence patterning chart is done at the carpet with you. You always do it at the end of a unit. You have to make sure that you've developed a lot of the language. They've learned a lot of the language throughout the unit, adjectives, adverbs, prepositional phrases. And I'm going to model it today using the word educators, but you would want to choose maybe a character from a story. As we go through it, we can talk about what word you might want to choose as your noun. Okay, so we're going to start with, we're going to create some sentences, and we're going to start off with our noun. Say that with me, noun.
Noun.
Say that with me, noun.
Noun.
So, in a sentence in English, the noun is also sometimes called the subject. Say that with me, subject.
Subject.
And a noun often is a person, place, or a thing. And the noun that we're going to work on today is the noun educators. Say that with me, educators.
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 Before I go on with the strategy, you choose a noun here and you use it in the plural form. It can be hard to use for a character, but you're using it in the plural form. So we have educators. So that's our noun. From there, we're going to talk about adjectives. Say that with me, adjectives.
Adjectives.
Say that with me, adjectives.
Adjectives.
And adjectives are always describing words. Say that with me, describing words.
Describing words.
And adjectives often describe nouns. So what I want you to do is put your heads together, or you're sitting at the carpet, turn to your partner and talk about adjectives that describe educators. Go ahead and, so educators are so, finish that sentence. Turn to your partner and come up with adjectives that describe educators. Go ahead. Just shout them out. Give me an adjective that describes educators. Shout them out.
Bored.
Bored?
Poor.
Poor.
Exhausted.
Exhausted.
Enthusiastic.
Enthusiastic. When you're not sure if it's spelled correctly, you tell the students, I'm not sure about that word. I'm going to put a little SP here to remind myself to look it up later on. It's great modeling to show that sometimes you don't know how to spell words. But you model it and you go back to the dictionary. The next day you might come back, or later on in the day, you say, I looked this word up and this is how it's spelled. It's also a great task for students to go look it up in the dictionary and correct it up here later on. One more adjective.
Creative.
Creative. Excellent. All right, let's just practice. So say that with me. Poor. exhausted,
Exhausted.
enthusiastic,
Enthusiastic.
optimistic,
Optimistic.
innovative,
Innovative.
creative.
Creative.
As you're getting these words from your students, a trick we have as a GLAD trainer, when they're shouting them out, you're just picking the words that you want to write up here. You're not picking all the words that you hear. So if they're saying things like nice, you're saying, oh, I want something more interesting than the word nice. Did you?
Well, that was, no, yeah, you answered, I said, it's it.
Through a GLAD workshop, and if you're doing a GLAD unit, you've got these charts. You have chants up around the room, you've got pictorial input charts, you've got all the walls are just filled with words, and so students have access to those words, and you've been scaffolding getting to this point. And so as you're going through the unit, you might want to think about maybe on one of your bulletin boards or whatever you have in your classroom, that they have access to words that they can use in this chart. Because you really want to work on that high-level vocabulary. You don't want you don't want insipid words up here. All right, and so that's from after the adjectives. We're going to move to our verb. Everybody say that with me, verb.
Verb.
And a verb is usually the action word of the sentence. Not always, usually. It's the action word. So turn to your partner and talk about some things that educators might do. Turn to your partner and talk about verbs. 2, 1, go ahead and just shout out some verbs that something that educators might do.
Differentiate.
Differentiate.
Describe.
Describe.
Assess.
Next, we're going to go to prepositional phrase. Say that with me. Prepositional phrase. And so, preposition, this is where you're going to model prepositions. And so, you're going to tell students, so a prepositional phrase is like the marker is on the hand, under the table, next to the student. So you're modeling with whatever you want to use, you're modeling what a prepositional phrase is. And so what I want you to do is and so we're going to stick with prepositional phrases that tell us when. Or where. And so turn to your partner and talk about where educators might model, or when they might differentiate, or where they might laugh or drink. Talk to your partners. Come out. In the classroom.
At their desk.
In their homes. Coffee room. At the carpet. At the carpet. If you're second grade and up, maybe third grade, you go on to adverbs.
Second or third grade?
What's that?
Second or third grade, we go on to adverbs.
If you think your kids are ready for adverbs, go ahead to adverbs. And so let's do adverbs. Everybody say that with me, adverbs.
Adverbs.
Say that with me, adverbs.
Adverbs.
Excellent. And so a lot of people in the United States get a certain adverb wrong. And that's the adverb well. So the first one we're going to work on is well. And I hear a lot of people say they use the word good when they should be using the word well. So I hear I shouldn't say teachers, I hear a lot of people saying, I speak good. I said, well, that's not right. We would say, I speak well. Adverbs, often but not always, adverbs talk about the verb. And so good is actually an adjective. The good book, the good dinner. I cook well. It was a good dinner. I speak French well. French is good. So turn to your partner and tell your partner something that you do well. Turn to your partner. Your partner and talk about things, how educators, how do they describe, how do they assess How do they model? Go ahead and talk to your partner about coming up with adverbs. So quickly, softly, talk to your partner. Another adverb. Quickly. Thoughtfully. Especially at the primary level, you want to add sketches to make sure that students can help them remember what the words mean. So you would be adding sketches. All right, from there, we're going to chant some sentences. And I hate chanting by myself, so please join me when you can. I'm going to choose, so we have our noun, we have educators. And this is going to sound different at the primary level, because at the primary level we won't have adverbs. But we'll do the whole chart first, and then we'll go back and show the primary level. I'm going to choose 2 adjectives. Exhausted. Creative. I'm going to choose 1 verb. I'm going to choose an adverb. And 1 prepositional phrase. All right, so join me. It's a really it's a tune everybody knows, and I hope that ELL specialists will join me now. Here we go. Ready?
Exhausted creative educators. Exhausted creative educators. Exhausted creative educators. Describe hopefully after school.
Excellent job. And so you would chant through it one time. You've chosen the words to chant. You then call on somebody, and usually we talk about in GLAD choosing a beginning English language learner. They get to change the stickies, and then usually in your classroom you have the hand or something to point with, and they get to point what you're singing, and it's a way for them to be involved in the lesson. And so you're chanting it all the way through.
Can you maybe just review one quickly without an adverb for the K2 teachers?
I'm going to do that right now. Okay, so this is the intermediate teachers and okay. So for primary level, you're not doing any adverbs. You just have your chart from verb and then prepositional phrase. And so for primary, you're going to choose 3 adjectives, and this is how it goes. Exhausted, optimistic, please join me, educators.
Exhausted, optimistic educators. Exhausted, optimistic, creative educators. Describe after school.
Should we do that one more time for primary?
Exhausted, optimistic educators. Exhausted, optimistic educators. Exhausted, optimistic, creative educators. Describe after school.
Sorry?
At some point you're starting to write the sentences.
Oh, we're getting there. Oh, we're getting there. Kristen, are you ready?
I am.
From here, you go to what's called the reading game. And Kristen is going to hand out, she's given you 2 adjectives, a noun, a verb, an adverb, and a prepositional phrase. When I give you the signal word, you and your teammates are going to put that sentence together, and you're going to chant it just like we did here. There's only one rule for the reading and trading game. Nobody can read upside down. All right, nobody can read upside down. And let me back up just one more. Notice the color coding up here. All right, we go from the reading to the trading game, and that's where this color coding really comes in handy. As well as there's all sorts of research behind color coding to help students remember things. And so when I give you the signal word, go ahead in your team, put your sentence together and chant it. Metacognition, metacognition. Thinking about our thinking. So go ahead and put your sentence together. Nobody can read upside down.
have to use all of them?
When you're ready, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
How did it work into laugh? Here, well.
Well.
Well, okay. And at the carpet? Yes.
And at the carpet? Okay.
Well done.
That group back there, go ahead and chant their sentence. Will you guys chant your sentence?
Optimistic, enthusiastic educators. Optimistic, enthusiastic educators. Optimistic, enthusiastic educators drink hopefully in their homes.
When you do the reading game, you give them exactly what they need. They get 2 adjectives if it's intermediate, 1 noun, 1 verb, one adverb, and 1 prepositional phrase. If it's primary, they're going to get 3 adjectives, 1 noun, 1 prepositional, 1 noun, 1 verb, and 1 prepositional phrase.
1 noun, 1 verb.
You want it to be the words that they've come up with, right? More.
They're all from this
So
chart.
this would be day 2 then?
This could
So
be,
you have time
yes,
to-
this would be day 2,
Okay.
exactly. And you might want to, before you actually do the reading game, you might want to pull them up to the carpet and chant some sentences
As
before
examples,
they,
and then-
exactly,
right,
before they go
okay.
back to their teams.
And I was really overwhelmed with my cards as you're doing the chart. So take your green group and give them each a different color and say you're in charge of copying the adverbs, you're in charge of copying the prepositional phrases, and then it's done as soon as the chart is done, and you don't have to do it in the evening.
Excellent idea.
I just got an email from Nancy McGivney, who's going to be doing the writing academies, and this is exactly, she said, what she is going to be doing. It's going to be working on that structure of a sentence and the different parts of speech. So I think this would be a fantastic strategy, for us after we go through that.
Exactly. Renee? Depending on your time, you can do the reading game and trading game, one right after the other, or
This was the reading game.
this is the reading game.
The put the words on the cards.
Each team has exactly the number of cards that they need to chant a sentence.
Okay.
That's the reading game. They get color-coded, they get 2 adjectives, whatever they need to make a sentence. We're moving now to the trading game, and Kristen is going to mix them up, and she's going to give each team a packet of cards that might have 3 adjectives, they might have no noun, they might have 3 prepositional phrases, and what the team needs to do is trade for the correct number of words that they need to make a sentence. And what you're going to do is you're going to tell students you're going to model it. You say, oh look, I need another adjective. I'm going to go to this team and I say, I need an adjective. Do you have an extra adjective, and can I trade you for a prepositional phrase? What you have to tell them is you're going to be listening for kids using the grammatical terms. You don't want them to say, I need a green one, can I trade a green for a red? You're saying, I'm listening for kids using the grammatical terms. And so when you get your packet of cards, go ahead and as a team decide on what you need to trade for. And just for I think for the essence of time, should we go ahead and do it, or you guys understand what you need to do? So take a look at your packet of cards. You would decide as a group. Renee, you want to tell us what you have in your group?
Sure. So we have 2 adjectives, a noun, 2 prepositional phrases, and our verb. So we are missing an adverb.
So you would have to get up and find a team that had an extra adverb. You'd say, I have an extra prepositional phrase. Can I trade you for that adverb? And so you're listening for teams, trading. They come back when they have the right number of words to go in their sentence, put it together, they chant it, nobody can read upside down. And that's the trading game. All right, there's one more variation to go with the sentence patterning chart. Let's say you've got all this great vocabulary up here on this chart, and let's say you're working on opposites, antonyms. You can go and, for example, take adjectives and say, today we're going to work on opposites. And so let's take a look at some of our adjectives here. What's the opposite of poor? And so you would write down as many of these that you could. You would write down the opposites, and then you could put this back up here and you could chant using the opposite of your adjectives. It's also a great way to work on verbs. So, boys and girls, we have our verbs up here, and these are all in the present tense. Today we're going to work on the past tense. Let's take a look at how some of these verbs, what they look like in the past tense. As you're working through this group of verbs in the past tense, you get into all sorts of things. You talk about some verbs, when you put in the past tense ed, you have to double the consonant. You can talk about how, for example, with cry, the y becomes an I and you add ed. So as you're going through this, you're talking about how some of these verbs, how they change in the past tense. Mary?
I'm not sure.
The issues of when you're trying to get the verb to agree. And I'm pretty sure as kids acquire the language, I think they acquire, don't they acquire the plural form of the verb before they acquire the singular form of the verb? And so you're working on where some of your English language learners might be.
Can you model what the opposite chances sound like?
I'd have to make sure that it would fit. So rich,
Pessimistic.
energetic educators, rich, energetic educators, rich, energetic educators.
I thought maybe it's just the opposites in the chant, but it's the opposites with the rest of the sentence.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Any other questions? This chart alone hits just tons of standards. Just tons. And it's really fun. I've seen it also middle school and high school level where you can develop two charts and you start working on conjunctions, whether coordinating conjunctions, and, but, or, nor, for, or the subordinating conjunctions. And you can start talking about how those sentences go together.
So, thinking point of use, would you put this to go along with a story or as a separate lesson? Like each week you would have the sentence patterning chart lesson.
Remember, it's the end of a unit, or end, let's see, how did that work in Treasures? You want to make sure that the kids have developed lots of vocabulary around whatever noun you're working on.
So that was my question. Is it, did you centered around the noun? So you pick a noun that goes with the unit, for example.
Exactly.
Okay.
So does anybody have their teacher's edition?